All right, so bienvenidos and welcome to U.S. versus International Law at Home and Abroad. My name is Benjamin Ramos Rosado. Everyone calls me Ben. I'm a proud member of the NYC chapter of the National Jericho movement, as well as the coordinator of the ProLibertad Freedom Campaign. I'll be one of your MCs for today. I'm going to send it over to my co-MC, Ann Lamb, to say a quick intro. Go ahead, Ann.
Okay, very quickly, I am Ann Lamb. I am also a proud member of the New York City chapter of the National Jericho movement, among other things. And I am very happy that we are having this webinar because, as we all know, the U.S. has no respect whatsoever for international law. And we are seeing this play out in real time from, Haiti to Puerto Rico to the Philippines to Guam to Palestine to West Asia. And so I'm really looking forward to hearing from our panelists.
And to start, we have an amazing group of people that are going to be talking with us today. I want to start off with our compañero, our brother Dahoud Andre, who works with KOMOKODA, the Committee to Mobilize Against Dictatorship in Haiti. He's also the host of Eritye Papa Desalin, a daily Haitian community radio program, and the host of Haiti, Our Revolution Continues on WBAI radio here in New York City. Welcome to the stage, Dahoud.
Thank you, family. I want to thank New York City Jericho for the invite, Sister Betty, who pushed this. Thank you. Well, I'm happy to join you guys, and I have to apologize because I have the radio program today on BAI soon, and I also have we have a KOMOKODA event this afternoon as well. So what I like to share with family about Haiti is, first of all, that to say that a lot of what comes through the mainstream and even progressive media about Haiti is not our reality in Haiti, but more so a narrative that the eternal enemies of our country, they want to put out, that we made a mistake, that the Black folks in Haiti, we made a mistake in standing up against slavery, in standing up against their oppression, France, England, Spain, to fight for freedom and to fight for the independence of our country. And worse yet, they want the world to understand that this mistake is continuing. Not only we should not have fought and gained our freedom, but this was a great sin, I would say, that we did by winning and by creating an independent country. Like I always say, that was a haven for enslaved Africans and Native Americans everywhere in the Caribbean, because the first constitution of our country, May 20, 1805, by Jean-Jacques Dessalines, and the name of my radio program in the Haitian community, Eritye Papa Desalin, it means the heirs, the children of Jean-Jacques Dessalines, those who seek to follow the example, the road that Jean-Jacques Dessalines set. That's what the name in Creole it means. Now, yeah, today the narrative, and forever, it's been that we are not able to run this country. We made the mistake of creating this country, of fighting for the independence. But after 220 years, because our independence, we got it in January 1, 1804, after a 13-year fight against the major enslavers, we can say. He defeated France, defeated Spain, defeated England, and all three of them had the support of the nascent United States at that time, because the United States did not want a, a, this example of a Black people, a free Black people existing. And our ancestors, they decreed that anyone who, any Black person, indigenous person fleeing oppression who landed on this island, you were immediately a free person. You were a Haitian citizen, and our nation would go to war for your freedom. So basically, this is what Haiti represents, and this is the problem with Haiti. Why the enemies of freedom, they have been for more than 220 years now, been persecuting this country, creating a narrative. Right now, we are in a reality where there are terrorist gangs armed by the United States. I mean, even by their own account, the United Nations account. All of these weapons, weapons of war in the hands of these young kids, children basically, with no means really to deal with this reality. They come from the United States. And the last month came out in the press that Dominican Republic had arrested a colonel in their army who was responsible for their armory, weapons stock. And this man and a group of other officers in the Dominican army, they've been stealing weapons. That's what the Dominican government says. We don't want to say they were passing, but it says they were stealing weapons, more than 900,000 weapons and ammunition, weapons of war, and selling them to these gangs terrorizing Haiti. In the past month, we also learned from the US ambassador in Haiti, a man named Dennis Hankins, that he coordinates with these gangs. Like everyone thought that the US was fighting against the gangs in Haiti, was supporting Kenya, bringing Kenya to Haiti to fight the gangs. But now we found out that from the ambassador's mouth that he coordinates activities around the embassy for the security of the embassy, he says, with the gangs. And he said something that was even more funny. He said that when there was shooting in the area and there are bullets who hit the compound of the U.S. Embassy, who hit U.S. Embassy vehicles, and he communicated with them to find out if this was intentional or if this was stray bullets. I don't know. This really would make you laugh. Like, imagine a New York City cop walking in the street and he's hit by a bullet, and the NYPD calls, the gang who runs the area and said, did you mean to shoot this cop? Or anyway, we in Haiti we find that pretty funny. The government that's in the country right now, ever since their last puppet president Jovenel Moise was assassinated, and the U.S. has its fingerprints all over the assassination of their puppet Jovenel Moise. Colombians, some of them were the same Colombians who had been implicated in assassination attempts against Maduro in Venezuela, against Luis Arce in Bolivia, and a U.S. firm brings them to Haiti through the Dominican Republic, and they perpetrate this act, and the U.S. picks up the investigation from Haitian authorities, and the US is running the investigation, of course, for many months now. And we have to point out it's a secret trial. You cannot just go and sit and report in the press. No, it's one of these, what's the name of this US agency, secret court. Anyway, it will come. That the US has, and they have a special counsel who is the one who will report what the US once reported about this case, the assassination of Jovenel Moise. But since then, you know, we've had, caretaker governments. And the last one, Ariel Henry, was taken out by by the US government, and with the support, collaboration of CARICOM, the Caribbean Commonwealth countries, they set up a 9-member presidential council in Haiti, which is a joke. Nobody takes it seriously. And they are, imagine in a country like Haiti with no electricity, no running water, food is a difficulty, and no security. These 9 guys, there's one woman, each of them getting something like $60,000 per month to participate in this farce. So, of course, they're going to do the bidding of the United States. The United States wants a new constitution in Haiti, and they want elections to have, by the end of 2025, to have an elected president in February of 2026. So the Constitution referendum, the US said that this should happen in March. Imagine about 3 months from now. But the US says 85% of the capital city, the West Department in Haiti, is you cannot move around. It's run by gangs. That's what they say. Although every time I do question how they calculate this 85% number, 80% number. The US also carries this farce that about half the population of Haiti are dying of hunger. Absolutely not true. But they need to create this narrative that this is an impossible country. It's not FISA court. Thank you, family. Exactly. Their decisions are in secret. And so when everybody understands that people cannot move around in the West Department. The country is about 12 million people. That's what we are told. But the last census was about 40 years ago, But at the same time, they tell us that they can calculate these numbers, and it doesn't make sense, but journalists repeat them and authorities repeat them. And from repeating it, you are made to believe that what you are hearing is the truth. Now, the gangs, as we said, they are terrorists working on behalf of the United States, creating chaos. And I have to say that there are some people running the lie that these gangs who are murdering poor people in poor neighborhoods, that they are making revolution, that they are fighting to change the reality in the country. This last weekend, one of them, remember, they call themselves the Vivre Ensemble gang, living together, but the Haitian people call them Vivre Sang, living in blood, because they are killing people. As I said, you're making a revolution, and yet you're only attacking poor people in the ghettos, in the poor neighborhoods. In one of these ghettos that is called Waf Jeremy, you guys might have seen in the press last weekend, one of these gangs, he calls himself Wa Mikanor, King Mikanor. He had his people killed, more than 200 elderly people. He wakes up and he decides that his child who was sick died, and it said it was voodoo. People put a curse on his son. And it's like the witch hunts of yesteryear over here. He orders them to go into this dirt poor area of the country, tin houses, call them houses, shacks. He says anyone with gray hair, anyone who's elderly, who looks over 70, just bring them. And these are the people. I know some of you might know Kim Ives of Haiti Liberté, who used to do a program on BAI. He's the main culprit pushing this garbage, that these gangs are making revolution. So this is the revolution. I have to say, in his newspaper this week, he owns a newspaper in the Haitian community. Finally, even them, they're saying, well, you know, this is too much. This is extra. Because I don't know, how do you justify a revolution that only kills poor, dirt poor people in the slums, the poorest slums of the country. So anyway, this is where we at. The Haitian people we continue our struggle inside and outside of the country. We've been at KOMOKODA, we've held protests throughout the year against the United Nations and the US mission to the UN. We call the United Nations, especially the Security Council, a terrorist organization. Some Haitians had thought that we could get some support from China, from Russia, but that has not been the reality, because for this Kenya project, they cut deals among each other, you know, and it's like I know you guys know the expressions, when the elephants fight, it's the grass that gets crushed, you know, and this is the reality of our people in Haiti. Struggle is on inside and outside. We've been protesting also for the past 2 months in front of the consulate of the Dominican Republic in Manhattan, because, you know, it's funny, but for some reason they imagine themselves to be white people, and they feel that Haitians are coming to darken their their culture, their race, their society. In 1937, you had Trujillo, dictator in the Dominican Republic. He assassinated something like 40,000 Haitians to cleanse the country. That was his language, you know. And the one who's there now, his name is Louis Abinader. On beginning of October, he said he's going to deport 10,000 Haitians per week. And of course, once the reality is so difficult with the gang terrorists, with the difficulties in Haiti, people move. People, just like, you know, the immigration problem here, it's everywhere. And Haiti and Dominican Republic, they share an island. So this is the easiest escape for the poorest people in Haiti, to walk across the border. And it's a porous border that goes across the country. It's like they put the people out, but the people come back. And this week, the government of Dominican Republic said they're up to 76,000 people that they have deported in 2 months. So I'm sorry I won't be able to stay any longer. I don't know, maybe 5 minutes if we have questions or any comments.
Thank you, Brother Dahoud. Again, if folks want to continue learning about what's happening in Haiti, WBAI, there's a wonderful program hosted by Dahoud. Haiti, Our Revolution Continues. I believe it's on Saturdays at 4 o'clock, right, Dahoud?
It's Saturday, today at 4 o'clock, I'll be on.
Wonderful. So if folks want to continue that discussion, thank you very much for moving forward in our program. If there are any questions, I don't know if folks want to throw in questions right now. Okay.
I would just like to thank Dahoud for this excellent in-depth presentation, because, you know, a lot of people follow what is the so-called narrative and don't exactly follow what is the real news. So thank you so much, Dahoud, for that.
Thank you, family.
Thank you. Thank you. And again, folks, WBAI, tune in online, WBAI.org, or go to 99.5 FM. Haiti, our revolution continues today and every Saturday from 4 to 5 o'clock. Again, Libertad para Haiti. I say it in my night as one Caribbean to another. Libertad para Haiti. The long history between the Dominican Republic, Puerto Rico, Cuba, and Haiti is one of strong, powerful solidarity. So we continue that today. Thank you so much, Dahoud. I just want to let our listening audience know that one of the main reasons why we're here today was because of a call to action that was made by Chicano political prisoner Shanatli. Some of you may remember Shanatli by his birthing name, which was Alvaro Luna Hernandez. He goes by Shanatli now. He made a call to action for us to do something during the period of time for international human rights. We all know December 10th is International Human Rights Day, and he asked for events to take place and for discussions and direct actions to be put together to highlight what's happening in the world, highlight what's happening in Latin America and Palestine, to highlight the plight of political prisoners. I just want to talk a little bit, give you a little bit of a background. On July 18, 1996, Sheriff Jack McDaniel of Alpine, Texas, went to arrest Shanatli at his home on a charge of aggravated robbery. No warrant for the arrest was issued. When the armed Shanatli questioned the sheriff's action, the cop drew his weapon. Before he could shoot, Shanatli disarmed him and fled. He did not inflict any injury on the officer. He could have further harmed the officer, but he didn't because that wasn't his intention. He was afraid for his life. He was sentenced in Odessa, Texas in June of 1997 to 50 years in prison. The trial evidence clearly showed that he was a victim of witch hunts and a police-orchestrated conspiracy to frame or eliminate him. Shanatli was recognized nationally and internationally as the coordinator of the Ricardo Aldalpe Guerra Defense Committee, which led the struggle to free Mexican national Aldalpe Guerra from Texas's death row after being framed by the Houston police for allegedly killing a cop. He spearheaded the national movement of La Raza. He spearheaded the Stop the Violence Youth Committee and the Prisoner Solidarity Committee in Houston, Texas, where he is known as a symbol of resistance to injustice, someone who fought bravely and powerfully against police repression in his community. His human rights work was recognized in Italy, France, Spain, Switzerland, Mexico, and other countries. We have a wonderful video that's going to be played right now, talking a little bit about Shanatli and the statement that he prepared for today. So we're going to cue that up. Information on the campaign. For those of you who want more information on the campaign for Shanatli, please go to freealvaro.net. You can also visit the Jericho movement. We have a wonderful page dedicated to Shanatli as well.
This is a statement from Shanatli, one of our long-held freedom fighters in U.S. prisons. Commemorating International Human Rights Day, December 10th, and unconditional freedom for our anti-imperialist prisoners of war, political prisoners in USA prisons and jails. On behalf of the Shanatli Freedom Campaign against U.S. imperialism, as a Jericho-supported political prisoner, Shanatli extends his appreciation and solidarity to Jericho, Jailhouse Lawyers Speak, and other human rights groups supporting the unconditional release of our prisoners of war, political prisoners in U.S. prisons and jails today, while the government continues to deny our existence, saying we are only common criminals, more of the same historical imperialist lies. On this International Human Rights Day, let the rattling of our cages and our battle cry be heard around the world that yes, face reality, we do exist and continue to fight for freedom and for a world without the evils of capitalism, imperialism, and oligarchic fascism, and the ecological destruction of planet Earth. On this 76th anniversary of the signing of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights on December 10, 1948, Shanatli holds the U.S. government accountable for its historical war crimes and crimes against humanity and calls on U.S. Human Rights Network to immediately assemble a team of renowned international human rights lawyers and experts to continue supporting a properly filed complaint, we charge genocide, with the International Court of Justice at The Hague, Netherlands, demanding release of our wrongfully imprisoned prisoners of war, political prisoners, many innocent of many crimes, but victims of COINTELPRO repression to silence our militancy and dissent. There exist from 80 to 100,000 political prisoners today, December 2024, caged in torturous supermax control unit prisons as part of the government's use of prison as a counterinsurgency tool to silence dissent, exterminating our grassroots leadership, such as the murders of Fred Hampton, Mark Clark, George Jackson, Ruben Salazar, the Boulder Six, to suppress and destroy our national liberation movements within the domestic fascist juggernaut. In September 2023, an investigative panel of the UN Human Rights Council, filed its report finding rampant racism in the entire U.S. criminal justice system after visiting various prisons that included a special visit by a UN Special Rapporteur with Leonard Peltier, American Indian Movement activist framed for the murder of 2 federal agents at Pine Ridge Indian Reservation, now 80 years of age, imprisoned for more than 48 years now, and in deteriorating health. Leonard was just denied parole by a cruel system of a punishment bureaucracy that extracts vengeance for the exercise of human rights. Like Leonard, Tinashley is also an elderly person now, after being imprisoned for more than 30 years, 24 of those years in consecutive solitary confinement at the notorious McConnell Supermax controlled gulag in Beeville, Texas. The cases of Leonard and Tinashley, among others, should be litigated before international human rights tribunals by a team of renowned human rights lawyers, holding the U.S. government accountable for these atrocities, crimes against humanity, by invoking the various international human rights accords available and demanding the United Nations Human Rights Framework stop being a puppet of U.S. imperialism. For this commemoration event, we call on the world human rights community to join us and make your voices heard, demanding unconditional release of our U.S. prisoners of war, freedom fighters, and get involved in their freedom campaigns to free Leonard Peltier, Tinashley, Imam Jamil Al-Amin, Mumia Abu Jamal, and many more of our imprisoned freedom fighters. Please go to freealvaro.net in order to get more information about Tinashley and to join the campaign. Thank you very much. Free all political prisoners and free the land.
Our next speaker is also another video that was sent to us. We cannot talk about international human rights right now without mentioning Palestine. I'm not even going to attempt to talk about what is happening in Palestine right now due to the fact that there is an enormity of horrific things happening in Palestine. It is a genocide. It is repression. It is sanctioned destruction of a people. And I want to introduce the next video. It's heartbreaking. It's heartbreaking to hear the thousands of people dying every day. Our next video comes from Susan Abulhawa. She is a writer, scientist, mother, activist, political commentator, and frequent speaker. Her novels, Morning in Jenin, The Blue Between Sky and Water, and Against the Loveless World are international bestsellers. She is also an author of a poetry collection titled My Voice Sought the Wind. My Voice Sought the Wind. She is the founder of Playgrounds for Palestine, a children's organization dedicated to uplifting Palestinian children. She is also co-chair of Palestine Rights, the first North American Palestinian Literature Festival. Let's cue up that video.
Before I start, I will not be taking any points of information, so kindly refrain from interrupting me. Addressing the challenge of what to do about the indigenous inhabitants of the land, Chaim Weizmann, a Russian Jew, said to the World Zionist Congress in 1921 that Palestinians were akin to, quote, the rocks of Judea, obstacles that had to be cleared on a difficult path. David Grun, a Polish Jew who changed his name to David Ben-Gurion in order to sound relevant to the region, said, quote, we must expel the Arabs and take their places. There are thousands of such conversations among the early Zionists who plotted and implemented the violent colonization of Palestine. and the annihilation of her native people. But they were only partially successful, murdering or ethnically cleansing 80% of the Palestinians, which meant that 20% of us remained, an enduring obstacle to their colonial fantasies, which became the subject of their obsessions in the decades that followed, especially after conquering what remained of Palestine in 1967. Zionists lamented our presence, and they debated publicly in all circles regarding what to do about us, about the Palestinian birth rate, about our babies, which they dubbed a demographic threat. Benny Morris, who was meant to be here originally, once publicly expressed that David Ben-Gurion, that David Ben-Gurion, quote, did not finish the job of getting rid of us all, which would have obviated what they refer to as the Arab problem. Benjamin Netanyahu, a Polish Jew whose real name is Benjamin Mielikowski, bemoaned a missed opportunity during the 1989 Tiananmen Square uprising to expel large swaths of Palestinian population, quote, while the world's attention was focused on China. Some of their articulated solutions to the nuisance of our existence included a, quote, break their bones policy in the 1980s and 90s, which was ordered by Yitzhak Rubitsov, a Ukrainian Jew who changed his name to Yitzhak Rabin for the same reasons. That horrific policy that crippled generations of Palestinians did not succeed in making us leave. And frustrated by Palestinian resilience, a new discourse arose, especially after a massive natural gas field was discovered off the coast of northern Gaza worth trillions of dollars. This new discourse is echoed in the words of Colonel Ephraim Itan, who said in 2004, quote, we have to kill them all. Aaron Sofer, an Israeli so-called intellectual and political advisor, insisted in 2018 that, quote, we have to kill and kill and kill all day, every day. When I was in Gaza this year, I saw a little boy no more than 9 years whose hands and part of his face had been blown off by a booby-trapped can of food that soldiers had left behind for Gaza's starving children. I later learned that they also had left poisoned food for people in Shujaiyyeh. That's bullshit. And in the 1980s, and 90s, Israeli soldiers had left booby-trapped toys in southern Lebanon that exploded when excited children picked them up. The harm they do is diabolical, and yet they expect you to believe that they are the victims. Invoking Europe's Holocaust and screaming anti-Semitism, they expect you to suspend fundamental human reason to believe that the daily sniping of children with so-called kill shots, that the bombing of entire neighborhoods that bury families alive and wipe out whole bloodlines is self-defense. They want you to believe that a man who had not eaten a thing in over 72 hours, who kept fighting even when all he had was one functioning arm, that this man was motivated by some innate savagery and irrational hatred or jealousy of Jews, rather than the indomitable yearning to see his people free in their own homeland. It is clear to me that we are not here to debate whether Israel is an apartheid or genocidal state. This debate is ultimately about the worth of Palestinian lives. It's about the worth of our schools, our research centers, our books, our art. It's about the worth of the homes we worked all our lives to build and which contain memories of generations. It's about the worth of our humanity and our agency, of our bodies and our ambitions. Because if the roles were reversed, if Palestinians had spent the last 8 decades stealing Jewish homes, expelling, oppressing, imprisoning, poisoning, torturing, killing, raping them, if Palestinians had killed an estimated 300,000 Jews in 1 year, targeted their journalists, their thinkers, their healthcare workers, their athletes, their artists, bombed every Israeli hospital, university, library, museum, cultural center, synagogue, and simultaneously set up an observation platform where citizens came to watch their slaughter as if a tourist attraction. If Palestinians had corralled them by the hundreds of thousands into flimsy tents, bombed them in so-called safe zones, burned them alive, cut off their food and water and medicine, if Palestinians made their children wander barefoot with empty pots, made them gather the flesh of their parents into plastic bags, bury their siblings, their cousins, their friends, made them sneak out from their tents at night to sleep on their parents' graves, made them pray for death, just to join their families and not be alone in this terrible world. If we terrorize them so utterly that their children lose their hair, lose their memory, lose their minds, and made those as young as 4 and 5 die of heart attacks, if we mercilessly forced their NICU babies to die, alone in hospital beds, crying until they could cry no more, died and decomposed in the same spot. If Palestinians used wheat flour, a truck, to lure starving Jews, then opened fire on them as they gathered to collect the day's bread. If Palestinians finally allowed a food delivery into a shelter with hungry Jews, then set fire to the entire shelter and a truck before anyone could taste a bite of the food. If a Palestinian sniper bragged about blowing out 42 Jewish kneecaps in one day, as one Israeli soldier did in 2019, if a Palestinian admitted to CNN that he ran over hundreds of Jews with his tank, their squished flesh lingering in the tank treads, if Palestinians were systematically raping Jewish doctors, patients, and other captives with hot metal rods, jagged and electrified sticks, and fire extinguishers, sometimes raping them to death, as happened with Dr. Adnan al-Bursh and others. If Jewish women were forced to give birth in filth, get C-sections or leg amputations without anesthesia, if we destroyed their children, then decorated our tanks with their toys, if we killed or displaced their women, then posed in their lingerie, if the world were watching the live-streamed systematic annihilation of Jews in real time, there would be no debating whether that constituted terrorism or genocide. And yet, 2 Palestinians, myself and Muhammad al-Kurd, showed up here to do just that, enduring the indignity of debating those who think our only life choices should be to leave our homeland, submit to their supremacy, or die quietly and politely. But you would be wrong to think that I came to convince you of anything. This House resolution, though well-meaning and appreciated, is of little consequence in the midst of this Holocaust of our time. I came in the spirit of Malcolm X and Jimmy Baldwin, both of whom stood here and in Cambridge before I was born, facing finely dressed, well-spoken monsters who harbored the same supremacist ideologies as Zionism, these notions of entitlement and privilege, of being divinely favored or blessed or chosen. I'm here for the sake of history, to speak to generations not yet born, and for the chronicles of this extraordinary time where the carpet bombing of defenseless indigenous societies is legitimized. And I also came to speak directly to Zionists here and everywhere. We let you into our homes when your own countries tried to murder you and everyone else turned you away. We fed you and we clothed you, we gave you shelter, and we shared from the bounty of our land with you. And when the time was ripe, you kicked us out of our homes and homeland. Then you killed and robbed and burned and looted our lives. You carved out our hearts because it is clear that you do not know how to live in the world without dominating others. You have crossed all lines. You have crossed all lines and nurtured the most vile of human impulses. But the world is finally glimpsing the terror we have endured at your hands for so long. And they are seeing the reality of who you are and who you've always been. They watch in utter astonishment the sadism, the glee, the joy, and the pleasure with which you conduct, watch, and cheer the daily details of breaking our bodies, our minds, our future, and our past. But no matter what happens from here, no matter what fairy tales you tell yourselves and tell the world, you will never truly belong to that land. You will never understand the sacredness of the olive trees, which you've been cutting down and burning for decades, just to spite us, just to break our hearts a little more. No one native to that land would dare do such a thing to the olives. No one who belongs to that region would ever bomb or destroy such ancient heritage as Baalbek or Bitir, or destroy ancient cemeteries as you destroy ours, like the Anglican cemetery in Jerusalem, or the resting place of the ancient Muslim scholars and warriors in Ma'manillah. Those who come from that land do not desecrate the dead. That's why my family, for centuries, were the caretakers of the Jewish cemetery on the Mount of Olives, as labors of faith and care for what we know is part of our ancestry and our story. Your ancestors will always be buried in your actual homelands of Poland, Ukraine, and elsewhere around the world whence you came, and Yemen. The mythos and the folklore of the land will always be alien to you. You will never be literate in the sartorial language of the thobes we wear, which sprang from the land through our foremothers over centuries. Every motif, every design and pattern speaking to the secrets of local lore, flora, birds, rivers, and wildlife. What your real estate agents call in their high-priced listings, quote, old Arab home charm, will always hold in their stones the stories and memories of our ancestors who built them. The ancient paintings and photos of the land will never contain you. You will never know how it feels to be loved and supported by those who have nothing to gain from you and in fact everything to lose. You will never know the feeling of masses all over the world pouring into the streets and stadiums to chant and sing for your freedom. And it is not because you are Jewish, as you want everyone to believe, because you are violent colonizers who think your Jewishness entitles you to the home my grandfather and his brothers built with their own hands on land that had been in our family for centuries. It is because Zionism is a blight onto Judaism. It is a break in humanity. You can change your names to sound relevant to the region, and you can pretend that falafel and hummus and za'atar are your ancient cuisines. But in the recesses of your being, you will always feel the sting of this epic forgery. That's why even the drawings of our children hung on the wall at the UN or in a hospital ward send your leaders and lawyers into hysteric meltdowns. You will not erase us, no matter how many of us you kill and kill and kill all day, every day. We are not the rocks that Chaim Weizmann thought you could clear from the land. We are its very soil. We are her rivers and her trees and her stories, because all of that was nurtured by our bodies and our lives over millennia of continuous, uninterrupted habitation of that patch of earth between the Jordan and Mediterranean waters. From our Canaanite, our Hebrew, our Philistine, our Phoenician ancestors, to every conqueror or pilgrim who came and went, who married or raped or loved or settled or enslaved or converted between religions or prayed in that land, leaving pieces of themselves in our bodies and our heritage. The fabled, tumultuous stories of the land are quite literally in our DNA. You cannot kill or propagandize that away, no matter what death technology you use or what Hollywood or corporate media arsenals you deploy. Someday, your impunity and your arrogance will end. Palestine will be free. She will be restored to her multi-religious, multi-ethnic, pluralistic glory. We will restore and expand the trains that run from Cairo to Gaza, Jerusalem, Haifa, Tripoli, Beirut, Damascus, Amman, Kuwait, Sana'a, and so on. We will put an end to the Zionist American war machine of domination, expansion, extraction, pollution, and looting. And you will either leave or you will finally learn to live with others as equals. Thank you.
Quite amazing. Very moving, of course. I was in a little bit of tears there, and I've watched that video more than once. And the only thing I edited out of that was a lot of the interruptions from the Zionists and some of the applause, and that saved like 5 minutes of time. You know, it's just horrible, but we would be remiss if we did not make the connection. And I think it was already done by the young man who spoke for Sinachli, but it never hurts to reiterate that the history of this white settler state is no different from the history of that white settler state. And, you know, this country's inception was based on the slaughter of literally millions and millions of indigenous people. At least 11 million people in what is now the United States of America were totally slaughtered by white settlers. And I'm sure the level of violence was just as bad as what we're seeing now in Palestine. So I would like people to remember not only that history, but that that history continues until today. And we have seen that, you know, indigenous people fighting for their rights are constantly being oppressed, repressed, and slaughtered. And that brings us to mention, not only to mention, but to remember our dear friend and comrade, Leonard Peltier, who is now 80 years old, was recently just denied parole for I don't know how many times, and given a 15-year hit, which means he would be 95 years old if he lived that long, which is not highly likely considering his health is very bad. There are a lot of efforts, including from Amnesty International, Leonard's, of course, support group, the ad hoc committee, and also in the Indian Collective. I put that in the chat. There's petitions you can sign, both from Amnesty International and from the Indian Collective, and the phone number to call the White House, 202-456-1111. There has been a lot of movement recently, including in Congress. I'm happy to report demanding that Biden grant clemency to Leonard Peltier. So, you know, we've been hearing this story since the year 2000, you know, all these presidents who are going to grant clemency to Leonard. But really, the situation is extremely, extremely urgent. We would like Leonard to be able to come home and spend his last years with his family and his people. His people already have the house ready for him and everything. So please, people, sign those petitions, make those phone calls, and you can also go to freeleonardpeltiernow.org. I'll stick it in the chat momentarily. And I do now have the honor of introducing also my good friend and comrade, Benjamin Ramos Rosado, commonly known as Ben, who has been for many years fighting for the freedom of another colonized nation, which suffered the same amount of slaughter as we now see the Palestinians suffering over the years from first Spanish imperialism and then U.S. imperialism. And that has been a century-long struggle to free their small island from the grips of U.S. imperialism, which also used their island as a military base. They were Southcom. for many years until the people rose up and kicked them out. So without any further ado, I'm very happy to hear from Ben, who has been doing this for a very, very long time and is also known by the Puerto Rican political prisoners as Ben the Pen, because he wrote to them consistently every week for all the years that they were inside and was instrumental in bringing them home.
Gracias. And again, Ben Ramos, I'm the coordinator of the ProLibertad Freedom Campaign. ProLibertad started in the mid-90s as a political prisoner campaign to support, obviously, political prisoners, prisoners of war, prisoners of conscience, grand jury resistors, and any Boricua that stood up against U.S. imperialism and colonialism in any fashion. I'm going to share with everyone today a piece that was written for the United Nations. Every year, the UN Decolonization Committee hearings take place at the UN in June, and they listen to petitioners coming from Puerto Rico and throughout the Puerto Rican diaspora as we talk about what colonialism is in Puerto Rico, and of course, framing it as an international human rights violation. I'm going to share a little bit of our presentation this year. I begin with a list. The U.S. invasion of Puerto Rico on July 25th, 1898, the forced sterilization of Puerto Rican women, the 60-year bombing and poisoning of the island municipality of Vieques, the assassinations of Don Pedro Albizu Campos, Ángel Rodríguez Cristobal, and Filiberto Ojeda Rios, the Ponce Massacre, the U.S. order to exterminate the Puerto Rican Nationalist Party, the gag order in Puerto Rico, the imposition of U.S. citizenship so we could die in U.S. wars, Operation Bootstrap, which created massive migration outside of the island and created the Puerto Rican diaspora, the use of COINTELPRO against the Puerto Rican independence movement, and the incarcerations of men and women who were part of the FALN and Los Macheteros in the 1980s. This list is but a small sampling of the international human rights violations that the U.S. government has committed against the Puerto Rican nation in the 126 years since the U.S. invaded our island. If I were to recite the entire list of atrocities, it would take me another 126 years just to finish. Puerto Rico is a colony. This is an irrefutable fact. It is recognized by numerous international human rights organizations, academics, artists, activists, religious figures, and world leaders. As a colonized people, we are victims of racism, xenophobia, and exploitation. We have been victims of U.S. economic and political exploitation and manipulation. There have been innumerable campaigns to eliminate our language, our national identity, and our culture. And when we have revolted against these injustices, when we have stood up and fought for our right to self-liberation, self-autonomy, self-respect, we have been labeled terrorists and either have been assassinated or incarcerated. This type of genocide is in direct violation of international human rights laws and charters. This repression is historically typical of a colonial relationship. Look at U.S. history, you'll see a lot happen. Same thing happened. As I read this statement, the Puerto Rican nation is still suffering under the Colonial Fiscal Control Board. It was installed by President Obama. This board has caused the closure of hospitals and schools, the elimination of pensions and retirement funds, and has caused rampant unemployment throughout the island. It pushed the passage of Luma Energy contract, which has cost millions of dollars in lost revenue, furthered the dependency on fossil fuels, and increased the price of other basic services. A fiscal control board that has forced mass migration outside of Puerto Rico. Forced relocation and economic refugeeism are also historically typical of a colonial relationship and violate various international human rights laws. Currently, the colonial government and the Fiscal Control Board have been championing a law called Act 60, which was passed in 2019, which has created a powerful tax incentive for rich Americans and Europeans to gentrify the island. It has inspired and supported a wave of cryptocurrency colonizers like Brock Pierce and social media moguls like Logan Paul to come to Puerto Rico to buy as much territory as possible just to fund their tourist ventures, just to make sure that they're gentrifying and forcibly removing the Puerto Rican people from their own land. Ventures like those rarely employ Puerto Ricans and oversaturate the gentrifiers' pockets because they barely pay taxes. So all the while Puerto Rican citizens are overtaxed and can barely survive and facing incredible amounts of unemployment, these folks make money. U.S. colonialism has made Puerto Rico a home for the rich who want to become even richer. There's a bill in Congress called the Puerto Rico Status Act, which pretends to resolve colonialism. The fact that this bill gives the U.S. government the power to approve or disapprove of our decolonization shows that the U.S. government has no real desire to change their colonial control of Puerto Rico. The fact that statehood is an option for decolonization is ridiculous and contradictory. The idea that the U.S. government is entitled to control and approve the mechanisms of our self-determination is dangerous, ridiculous, and again, contradictory. We support, as a nation, a decolonization process that's laid out by international law. Right now, Puerto Rico is going to be entering a really uncertain 4-year stage. We have President-elect Trump in control of this country, and the current governor-elect of Puerto Rico, Jennifer Gonzalez, is a massive Trump supporter. She was one of the leaders and founders of Latinos for Trump. So we are expecting a 4-year period of a repression, of more economic destruction, more forced migration, more environmental destruction, political repression. We're very lucky to say that there are no Puerto Rican political prisoners in U.S. jails for now. The more we start resisting and the more we're standing up, the more we're going to see that repression and incarceration take place. It's just something that's historic with our people. Despite all of that, we make freedom happen. We liberated our political prisoners. We were able to remove the most powerful Navy from our, the archipelago and force the U.S. Navy to stop its bombings in Vieques. We've been able to stop U.S. What we call U.S. Labor colonialism. We've been able to stop U.S. unions from coming into the island and destroying local unions and replacing them with their own. So we Boricuas, we have the power to make freedom happen. And we made that freedom happen because we reached out to our international allies. When I say we freed our political prisoners, you freed our political prisoners with us. All of you stood with us in the international movement working together. Those of us in the Black community, those of us in the Palestinian community, those of us in the Cuban community, those of us in the Chinese community. It was an international human rights, movement that created freedom. And that same type of solidarity has made a lot of our victories occur. Now, right now, we don't pretend to think that the U.S. government is going to free Puerto Rico. In fact, we don't need the U.S. government to free Puerto Rico. We need a mass popular movement on the island and throughout the diaspora with our allies standing with us. We have the power to make freedom happen in Puerto Rico. And that's something that we are working on. We're building, we're educating. And is it a slow process? Absolutely. It is an evolution towards liberation, but we will see it. We stand with our allies. We're proud to say that in Puerto Rico, there are weekly, protests in front of the Israeli consulate there because we recognize the Palestinians as our brethren. They're our people. And we stand in solidarity with Leonard Peltier. Why? Because Leonard has always, and the indigenous community has always supported our liberation. So I'm going to keep it brief and focused on that. We have a lot to do to free our political prisoners. We have a lot to do to stand in solidarity with all colonized people around the world. And it's very interesting to say we have the same struggle, same enemy, because if we look at international colonialism for what it is, we see the U.S. government involved in a lot of countries. We see the U.S. government involved in repression of various movements, whether it's economic, political, or militaristic. Thank you, folks. Again, I'll be available to answer any questions on Puerto Rico. Que viva Puerto Rico libre y socialista. Thank you.
Que vive, que vive. Thank you so much, Ben. So much history there and all of these parallels that you just made, which are really important to make, that, everybody is facing the same. Oh, Malcolm said it too. We're facing the same common enemy, the same oppressor. So it behooves us to unite, to fight against it. And I am going to have the honor and the pleasure of introducing Jihad Abdulmumit, who I hope is there. And he is a former political prisoner or prisoner of war in this country. He is a Black Panther Party and Black Liberation Army person, activist, freedom fighter. And he also, while he was in prison, was doing work around HIV and AIDS. And when he was finally released after 23 years, he continued to do that work in the community, which is really admirable. And also, of course, he has been a fearsome fighter for the liberation of all U.S.-held political prisoners and prisoners of war, as well as international political prisoners. So without further ado, thank you, Jihad, for being with us, and really glad to see your face. And tell us about all the U.S. violations of international law that are going on in U.S. prisons and jails, because there's so many of them. We just got an emergency alert for Imam Jamil Al-Amin, medical emergency. So
Yes, indeed. All right, thank you, Comrade Ann. I'll begin with Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim, in the name of Allah, most gracious, most merciful. Again, I salute all the panelists and all those that are listening. Give high salutes to Comrade Ben and Ann, and I see Brittany and Sophia and Comrade Tag, and each and every one of you. This is a very important webinar. I want to just speak to some of the gross violations of international law that the United States government is in violation of. And as you're listening to some of this, the problem with this is that this has become so normalized that when you hear it, oftentimes you're just numb to it. It's just our everyday reality. And so I wanted to start before I cite some of these violations, just to bring out the most important part, and that is what to do about it. So as I'm talking about these things, I want you to kind of like think about what you can do, because it's not just hearing the narrative, it's what to do about it. And so we have to disrupt, we have to interrupt, we have to destroy, we have to expose this normalization of genocide, the normalization of oppression, the normalization of exploitation, the normalization of social degradation. We have to destroy that. We have to interrupt that narrative where it's not just a normally accepted thing in American life as we go about our 24/7 grind to survive under a capitalist system that we live under. We have to be thinking, comrades, about really collaborations and coalition building. We had some very good, real solid building with our Puerto Rican comrades that Ben has spoken about. I myself was political prisoner with the comrades there from the FALN for many years in Lewisburg Federal Penitentiary. And on the political prisoner level, amongst the former prisoners, we have that unity. And I spoke in Puerto Rico last year, so about how if we can replicate the unity that the freedom fighters that are indigenous to the United States proper have with our comrades in the FALN and the Macheteros, if we can replicate that in our actions out in the so-called free world, we would have moved forward in our movement exponentially. If you can feel what I'm saying, that unity is unbreakable. Also, I want to at the end of this, speak a little about what initiatives we can have to really make sense and make use, and how can we defeat and move forward with our liberation. The heart-wrenching narrative that Comrade Sister Susan gave, that needs to be all over the planet. That needs to be put out there all over. That the way that was articulated, to kind of, like I said, defeat the narrative of normalization, for people to hear the way that was broken down. I agree with you, Ann. That was heart-wrenching to hear that. And when we think about what I'm going to talk about, these violations, to how to fund these movements to get us from point A to point B, and now movement circles, and how to expand those movement circles and support one another. So that I want you to kind of like harbor that in your heart and your mind as I go through these violations. There's a reflection on my wall. I see that. If you see that, I just want to make sure you know that those aren't prison bars. It's the bedroom light. I'm saying, I'm just going to give me a question. Where the heck am I? So U.S. violations of international laws and agreements that they have. And we're talking about the United Nations Convention Against Torture, the CAT agreement. We're talking about violation of the International Covenant of Civil and Political Rights, the ICCPR. We're talking about the Mandela Rules, which one of the organizations besides New York Jericho that's behind the scenes of a lot of this is Spirit of Mandela Coalition. And thank you, Tag, for all of that. So we're talking about established treaty agreements, international law that the United States routinely violates. And the consequence of that is not only mass incarcerations and torture in prisons and medical neglect and things of these natures, but also bleeds into the genocide, the colonialist exploitation of other countries around the world, the gutting of Africa, the continent of Africa, the decimation of Palestinians, and the whole intrigue around the rest of the world. Okay, so the first one, torture and cruel, unusual, inhumane, or degrading treatment as a violation of the CAT agreement and ICCPR. We're talking about solitary confinement. You know, there's any psychologist worth their assault at all will say that 15 days in any type of isolation begins to have irreversible effects on our mental psyche. And solitary confinement is a regular tool of torture in the United States prisons and jails, not only for political prisoners, but for prisoners in general. And I say prisoners in general, even though the question is every prisoner has their reality is political in that sense. You know, because you're going in front of a racial judicial system. And so regardless if a person committed a street crime against another person in the community, the whole scenario is couched in a certain political reality that's supported by white racism, white supremacy, as we know. So even though a person's street crime or robbery or something reprehensible, the whole context of that socially and politically is framed in the political situation there. Solitary confinement, the use of force and abuse, inadequate medical and mental health issues that exist. And Comrade Ann mentioned the latest urgent appeal to Imam Jamil Al-Amin, his myeloma cancer and his age. And then you also talked about Leonard Peltier. You know, it's interesting, when I was in prison, and I was a political prisoner for 23 years, sisters and brothers, I remember reading a case. I wouldn't know the citation of it, but it's probably cases actually that reflect the response of the United States Supreme Court on some of these Eighth Amendment rights issues and violations. Eighth Amendment, cruel, unusual punishment, the Eighth Amendment of the United States Constitution. And I remember one response from Clarence Thomas, one of the Supreme Court justices, in denying a claim from some prisoners. He said, and I want you to check this out, because it explains the whole reality of normalization of oppression and abuse and torture. He said, it may be cruel what is happening. It may be cruel, but it's not unusual. And in order for it to be a violation of the Eighth Amendment, amendment of the United States Constitution, it has to meet both prongs. It has to be cruel and it has to be unusual. So the fact that you're in solitary confinement for years and years and years and years and years, you know, it may be cruel. Yeah, that's hard. It's rough, but it happens all the time. It's regular. It's not unusual. And it has to meet both prongs to be a violation of the Eighth Amendment. So subsequently, nothing was done about that. All right. So thank you, Clarence Thomas. Thank you, United States Supreme Court. So what it's really saying is that this treatment of prisoners and political prisoners, and even us in society as a whole, and what's happening is, even in Gaza, if you want to extend it to anywhere, it is cruel. Yes, people are dying, but it is not unusual. This is what we do. This is called imperialism. It's called the prison industrial complex. It's called white supremacy. It's called systemic racism. This is what it's called. You're used to it, right? The United States is 400 years. You got to be used to something. Before anything that's happening for 400 years without stint or break, it got to be regular, right? Am I right? Yes, sir, you are right. So there's no violation here. Cruel as it may be, is very usual. So we want to break that narrative of normalization of our oppression and our extinction. So we just want to keep that in mind. The next thing is the mass incarceration and racial discrimination in violation of Article 6 of the International Covenant on Civil Political Rights. We had a tribunal that was sponsored by the Spirit of Mandela Coalition several years ago at the Malcolm X and Betty Shabazz Educational Center there, also formerly known as the Audubon, where Malcolm Haj Malik al-Shabazz was assassinated. Mass incarceration was one of the elements of genocide that's inflicted upon us here in the United States, Black, Brown, and Indigenous people. That was mentioned in the tribunal. And it's also mentioned, in violation of the Mandela rules, which is kind of like when Jalil Muttaqin had called for the building of this coalition when he was a political prisoner in prison, mind you now. The use of the word Mandela stemmed from there's a United Nations Code of Conduct and Treatment of prisoners when it comes to their conditions in prison, when it comes to solitary confinement, when it comes to their medical care, when it comes to their actual living conditions and things of this nature, which the United States government, state and federal, is in cold-blooded violation of. So thus the term Spirit of Mandela, because they're keying off of the Mandela rules. I just want to make that clarity because I know there's commentary and criticism about Nelson Mandela himself and his, and as he got out of prison. I don't want to get into that, but the use of the term, not only for Mandela as an individual, but his wives and also and just the whole framework of what that stood for as it relates to the Mandela rules, which is a component, established standards in the United Nations. So much for that, the United States paying attention to that. But it is also in violation of Article 26 of the ICCPR. Prison labor, sweat camps, things of that nature, mostly reflected now in state prisons, not so much in the federal systems, kind of shut down on a lot of the labor that goes on in the federal system. But the majority of prisons, when we talk about mass incarceration, is reflected in state prisons, not necessarily federal prisons. But when you talk about it all together, when you talk about them all together and then your local county jails and jails, when we say mass incarceration, sisters and brothers, I know this, for those that first going to hear this statistic is mind-blowing, but for those, we already know that the United States comprises of 5% generally of the world population, but 25% of the prison population. So I always say that, Gaza definitely is the largest open-air prison in the world. And I say, man, but you want to know something else? The United States comprises the largest indoor prisons in the world. The United States government does. So they got the open air prison and we got the closed in prison. So, you don't go outside. You live in tiger cages. This is our existence in the United States. All right. So mass incarceration, we're talking about millions of people. And if you just take a snapshot photo of how many people in prison at one time, that may not even consider the fact that those on probation and parole. It may not consider the fact that those that were released and recycled in, those that's coming in. It's just after all this recycling and people coming and going, you take a picture shot of how many people were there at that moment, you may come up with 2 million. But if you consider all those that's left and gone outside of that prison shot, you know that you're talking about many more millions of people that's been incarcerated in one fashion or form in the United States of America. God bless America. Okay, but the prison labor thing is also exploitated in prison. Treatment of juveniles and violation of the Convention on the Rights of the Child. All these are United Nations. All this is international law. And the United States government is guilty of every last treaty, every last agreement, every last convention. All right, where we have juveniles that are sentenced to life in prison, given so much time, it might as well be equal to life, even though they may not say LIFE. And the length of the sentence would be equated to that. Juveniles going to adult prisons is common for that. One of the fronts that's been very good on challenging that which I'm proudly on the board of the Abolitionist Law Center. If you're familiar with, in Pennsylvania, I'm on the board of that under Salim Holbrook and those comrades there have done an excellent job in fighting against that. That's a matter of fact, Salim, was able to get released, because he was one of the juveniles that's sitting under life without parole. Excuse me. All right, so that's also a violation. The death penalty in the United States, usually applied racially against Black, brown, and indigenous people. And just, recently on September the 24th or so, right around about that, the execution of Marcellus Khalifa Williams, who was already in prison for a couple of decades. All of the evidence, including the prosecutor saying, okay, maybe he should not be executed. All of that, instead of the fact that, the hand and reach of the insidious, wicked, reprehensible legacy of Judge Taney coming out of the grave that said we were 3/5 of a man, 3/5 of a person, came and they executed him. The same territory of Judge Taney and him signing the Dred Scott decision there. You see it's still in effect. They executed the brother anyway, in spite of the massive pleas and all the DNA. They say DNA evidence really is a game changer when it comes to finding somebody's guilt. Oh, really? No, it's not. Not when it comes to Black, brown, indigenous people. DNA don't mean a GD thing, for real. Not for real. Because the DNA evidence proved that this man was innocent. You're talking about, you're looking at all these CSI programs and all this, the DNA, there's the thread of evidence, there it is, now we find the real culprit. But that doesn't really work in real life. Because if it did, then, the number of Black, brown, indigenous people on death row and doing all these lengthy sentences or doing any sentences, doing it just 30 days, it wouldn't even be happening if that was really true about DNA evidence. So that's to the DNA evidence. It doesn't mean a daggone thing when it comes to us, for the most part. All right, so there you go with that. So much for CSI. Thank you, CSI, for portraying that scientific reality that doesn't bleed down into the social political life of the poor and oppressed people in the United States of America. Thank you very much. We're still the racism and the oppression obliterates DNA evidence. There you go. The proliferation of private prisons. So I say this to all our sisters and brothers, like prison abolition, we have to really consider. We are good at protesting, but we're not good at building infrastructure and institutionalizing our resistance. We may get a B+ or so for protesting different issues, maybe not even that. Just sorry to say that we got a lot of work to do. So I hope that's an encouraging thing, not a condemning condemnation of what we're doing. But we may be out there on the protest level. But when it comes to institutionalizing our resistance and building these frameworks and structures and acquiring land and really talking about governance so that in the long run, we can change this narrative. In the long run, we can reach the masses of people. And I'm not talking about 40, 50 people. In the long run, we can establish these coalitions and the People's Senate and this representation of people in the United States where we have a voice that can actually change things. All right. So, but right for now, when you talk about that and we don't have any structures in our community to stop the disrespect of women, the oppression of women, the street crimes, the violent crimes, our own mental health issues and things of this nature, there's something really wacko about our theory. You just can't talk about that and don't talk about what the hell are we going to do about our dysfunction and how we kill and disrespect ourselves and how we destroy our own communities. You feel what I'm saying? As formerly member of the Black Panther Party, alhamdulillah, praise be to Allah. And we did recognize back then the importance of community survival programs and controlling the narrative in the street vibe, in the community vibe, in our communities. So the Black Panther Party wasn't just one of protests and resistance and fighting against police violence, but it was also one of building our community, educating, making sure that Sister Lady can walk across the street, making sure that you got the grocery, making sure that we had the co-ops, making sure we can take care of our medical health care with our free health clinic, making sure we have free breakfast programs and lunch programs and dinner programs, make sure we can maybe to transport our senior citizens from one place to another, making sure that our streets were safe, not only from the aggression of the police, but from the aggression of each other. Death to the pusher. How did that sound? Instead of glorifying the push and selling drugs, we're taking you out of our community one way or another. How does that sound, brother, man, sister, lady? That's a whole different type of struggle. And so we're not trying to replicate what we did back in the 60s. We're trying to build on that and make it even stronger and more relevant to 2024, 25, 26, and 27. But we do have a lesson to learn about institutionalizing our resistance, so that when we talk about, if we're talking about prison abolition, you open the door for the privatization of prison. But we talk about taking the pigs out of our community, then we're leaving what we're going to have privatization of, I've had the opportunity to be in South Africa quite a bit last year, and there's no police really controlling the communities. They just don't have the budget for it. There's no police. There you go. Hey, but you know what takes the vacuum is the privatization of these white security firms. So what are we talking about here? So we can shoo them out. Get the heck out of here. We don't want you here. You come to the Sonia Massey, you're going to kill another Sonia Massey. Come in our kitchen and blow our brains out. Every dispute you're going to shoot is going to be how many Breonna Taylors we're going to see. But if we don't think in terms of establishing our own infrastructure, then what are we talking about, sisters and brothers? What are we talking about? So there you go. All right, back to the point. Just want to bring in and talk about the goose. Don't talk about the gander. Don't talk about the goose. Whatever Haj Malik al-Shabaab is saying. We want to just keep everything in perspective. All right. When we show these violations, what you going to do about it? All right. So So private prisons, the proliferation of that. There's no oversight in private prisons. You got oversight in state and federal prisons. And you see how bad that is. So you can imagine with a private prison with no oversight. So in the state prison, you do have some oversight. We have appeal to the court. You shut this prison down. The abuses of women. I got a senior moment with one of the prisons with the women was just closed down. They look at Carswell, where Afia Siddiqui is in, and all the abuses and women getting raped and all the. There's oversight. People are kind of looking at it as slow as hell to bring about a change. Imagine if there's no oversight. That's a violation of international law. Okay, conditions of detention, I kind of spoke about that. And immigration detention, you can expect a whole lot of that going underneath Donald Trump when he gets in. If you thought it was bad before, you can only imagine what it's going to be now, based upon what he's clearly telling you he's going to do. So those are some of the, Ann and Ben, those are some of the international violence, not some of them, but those are the gross internet. The United States is guilty on a general, regular basis of every last aspect of international law that deals with our humanity and the welfare of human beings. And it is so grossly proven by the commentary that Comrade Sister Susan just read in terms of the Gaza. And you can listen to that commentary and say, yeah, man, that's messed up, man. We have to change that complacency. And it's not so much that people are complacent or apathetic. I think this here comes about where the leadership is not effective enough to be able to challenge the energy and the resentment of people against oppression and exploitation and violence to in a direction that's going to empower them so that we can envision our own freedom and liberation. So this here it's not always like, I don't care. The average person does care. But when there's no vision of anything different or better, that's going to just remain like this. Well, let me go get some shopping in. You understand what I'm saying? So kind of winding this down and addressing the issue that was presented before me, sisters and brothers, the United States is routinely in violation of international law. I think Al-Haj Malik al-Sabaz would probably roll over in his grave if he knew how impotent and ineffective the United Nations was, because things have changed. I mean, you said our struggle is not just a civil rights struggle, it's a human rights struggle. We got to take it to the UN. Well, we always got to take it to the UN. We cannot take back on that. We can't let the pressure off. As the minute the pressure is left off, we'll go back just like this. So we got to keep the pressure on, but it has a lot to do with, like I said, not to be redundant, we have to institutionalize and normalize our resistance and make it stronger. We have mechanisms to do that. We have an initiative of the People's Senate. And that's a strong, viable, revolutionary network that we're trying to build across the United States, where we'll be able to look at our needs in different regions, to be able to extrapolate and assess and prioritize what they are, and be able to regurgitate and send out resources where they need to go. For example, so when we say that we need these letters and petitions and names behind the release of Leonard Peltier, we have a network that can exponentialize that response. When we talk about freeing Afia Siddiqui, who is one of the worst cases that Jericho's ever represented at all, a woman being oppressed to the extent that she is being raped in the United States prison, and our response is, who is she? You see? So with some initiative like the People's Senate, this information can be more rapidly dispensed about the people in the United States to organizations and activists and clergy and professionals and unions and doctors and nurses and what have you, and get a organized, disciplined response to try to bring about the change. This is why we have to really build on those type of initiatives, and of course, the development of all of our organizations as a whole. So yes, the United States is guilty, and the thing about it, everything that I just said. And even though the supreme, fantastic, phenomenal, and very tragic and sad articulation that Comrade Susan just gave about the Gaza, we have to utilize this information to build movements that's going to empower us to make that change, not just in the form of resistance itself, but resistance that's going to include infrastructure building, coalition building, where we can. The numbers game is I'll shut up in a minute. The numbers game is very important in the United States or anywhere in the world. The masses of people ideally and historically can bring about necessary changes that we need. Without that, then it's going to be, if you can see me, it's going to be another level of struggle that's going to be disastrous. You hear what I'm saying? Reaching the masses of people to bring about the changes that we're talking about is essential that we do this in the age 2024, because once the shooting and all that starts, that statement, blood to the horse's brow and woe to those can't swim, then I think the masses of people won't be able to swim. And as the brother from Haiti said, when two elephants fight, the grass underneath gets trampled. We have to prepare ourselves for our even our own level and responses in the reactionary government's response to our responses. We have to really start preparing ourselves so that we do not get crushed because of our inadequacies and our inability to organize ourselves. So this is a plea, and I'll end on this. This is a plea and a call for everybody that's listening now, and those that were listening when this recorded webinar is sent out there to hear this, that we have to be keen, dead set on building serious collaborations amongst ourselves, respecting ourselves, and growing our movements, not only for the protests of what's happening immediately before us, but also, the long trajectory struggle that we have before us, because next year we'll be talking about this, year after that, and then it's going to be the next elections, if there's even elections 4 years from now. All these things, we have to do that. So let's be accountable to ourselves. Let's be accountable to each other. Let's be accountable to the time and the passing of time in our lifetime. So I hope I did justice to this, Ben, and Ann, on the subject of the violation. Yes, the United States is a violation of international law in every less manner. It's normalized. They don't give a damn. They don't give a damn. You can get an old black woman when all the countries are saying ceasefire in Gaza. In the United Nations, you can get an old, excuse me, sisters, for saying it this way, but I do mean it, an old, decrepit ass black woman. Sorry, this is not a comment for women, but it's definitely a comment to her. Raise her little wicked finger and object, and that objection overrules every country that raises its hand. That's what we're playing with. Are you even serious? They got a black person as the face of the United States and the United Nations Human Rights Council. Can you imagine that? We got a lot of work to do. But yes, the United States is in violation, and we have to free our political prisoners. We have to unite. We have to collaborate. And once again, thank you, Ben. Thank you, Ann. Thank you, Brittany. Thank you, Sophia. Thank you, Tag. And thank you, listeners, for having me come on. And as Comrade Susan and the brother before that was talking, I appreciate each and every one of you. And our closest, Subhanakallahumma wa bihamdika, Ashhadu an la ilaha illa anta astaghfiruka wa atubu ilayk. Assalamu alaikum.
Alaikum assalam. Thank you so much, Jihad. And we have been putting in the chat several times. People should check it out. The People's Senate is one of these things that is very important in talking about organizing and building infrastructure and creating a stronger resistance movement in this country, which we seriously, seriously need. And so people should definitely go to that site, check it out, be in touch with us. We're working on that and trying to reach out to both individuals and organizations that are thinking similar matter. So we're talking basically about, a united front of the people. And that's very important. Now, I don't know if anybody, well, I did want to say one other thing before that. Speaking of the horrors in U.S. Prisons and jails and ICE detention centers, we have recently received several reports, both in Red Onion State Prison in Virginia, where prisoners are immolating themselves. That's how bad the situation is. People are literally setting themselves on fire. This is also happening in Tacoma, Washington, in an ICE detention center, which is an immigration detention center run by a private prison. And people there have not only been on hunger strike, but have also been in that situation where they are setting themselves on fire. That's how desperate the situation is. And nobody can say that that is not a violation of all kinds of laws. It's just a violation of morality to treat people like that. Anyway, we do want to ask people if people have any questions. We can take some questions from folk and hopefully be able to answer them. So go ahead, Tag, if anybody has their hand up and wants to say anything.
No doubt. So let's start with, before there was a hand up, I'm opening up your microphone, and this is Joyce Scott Brayboy. Let's start with you. So again, peace. Joyce Scott Brayboy, your mic should be permitted to open if you unmute, if you still have a question. And if not, we'll go on to Brenda Walker. Okay, Joyce, if you could let us know if you come back, and we can.
It's Joyce. I was just having difficulty in the beginning of getting sound from this thing. I had to sign out and come back in again. So, but I'm, great information. I'm glad to be one. I'm glad one of our chairpersons from Operation Power, Brenda Walker, got us interested in what's going on here, and we'll stay in tune and touch, and great work. We got to continue to fight. Have a great one.
Much respect. Appreciate that, and definitely looking forward to building further. So let's shift over to you then, Brenda Walker. Your mic should be accessible.
Okay, thank you. This is a wonderful program. I just wanted to, I'm unable to get the information from the chat. This is not allowing me to copy. I can get some of the links, but some of the other information I'm not able to get. So is there any way that you can make it accessible? Can you hear me?
Yes, peace. We do have the chat saved, and so we could send that out
Okay,
to
great.
participants if that would be helpful.
Thank you.
You bet. Anyone else want to get on queue for questions or comments? Please just throw a hand up if so. No doubt. So I see Joe Ja. You should be able to speak.
Hi, yeah, it's Joy. Could you say more, hi, Anne, about support for Leonard? I mean, or will there be protests in January? I mean, we can, sign the petition, but is there more that you'd like us to do?
And you're on mute.
I just unmuted myself. Yeah, that's very important to do those things of signing the petitions and calling the White House and also emailing. They have some contact thing where you can actually email Biden. I know that the legal team is working on other things that we are not to be talking about, so we will not talk about them. But this is currently something that everybody can do, and it's very important. And if there are any upcoming, demonstrations, particularly for Leonard and clemency, we will definitely let people know. It'll be up on our website, thejerichomovement.com. It'll be up on Leonard's website, freelandandpeltiernow.org. It'll be up on New York City Jericho's website, jerichony.org. We'll send it out. We'll post it on social media. There have been many, many protests for Leonard over the years. There have been ongoing, especially from his own community, many, many years of, asking and begging and pleading and going to the White House and having huge demonstrations in Washington and asking, to free this man who is totally innocent and is absolutely not guilty of any crime whatsoever, except for being an indigenous person. In fact, the United Nations said that last year. The only reason that Leonard is being detained, he's being arbitrarily detained because he is an indigenous person. And that was a decision that they made and issued a 17-page report on, which of course is being totally ignored by the United States. So, we do have to pressure Biden, and I have seen that in recent, days, some people in the Congress have been doing that. I think it was 70 some odd people who just signed on from Congress, to Biden to say, come on, release this man already and let him go home. So, that's something that is very important and we need to do. And of course, if anybody wants to organize any kind of demos for Leonard, you can be in front of a federal courthouse anywhere in this country and you can hold a rally and you can, educate people about Leonard. Because that is, very important and we need to do it. We don't want Leonard to die in prison, and he doesn't want to die in prison. Like he says, he's not afraid of death, but he would prefer to die on his land with his people. So yes, thank you for putting that in there, Verbena. Very important. And we'll see where we get, but we have to try. People sometimes, like Jihad was saying, people sort of, no, we can't do that. This is not the time to give up. This is not the time to despair. This is the time to pick up the work, as our dear comrade Safi Bukhari always said. We need to pick up the work. We need to organize. We need to hit U.S. imperialism with one united fist. It's the only way that we can make change. And thank you so much, Joy, for being here.
Thank you.
Oh, thank you, Tag, for posting the day of mourning statement from Brother Peltier. It's a beautiful statement. And I also wanted to thank Tag and Sophia and Brittany for holding down the technical side of this, which I have hardly any knowledge of and would have made a total mess of. So really appreciate it, in addition to all the other work that you do. And I want to thank everybody for being here. And we will be, posting this once it finishes, whatever it does, rendering and cogitating itself. And we will do that. So I thank everybody for being here. We have to remember that we have to free the land. We have to free our political prisoners. We have to free our minds. And we have to free ourselves. Because, Che Guevara said it a long time ago. The hardest part of revolutionary change is changing ourselves. And that's what we need to do, because we've all been colonized. Everybody has colonized minds. We see it everywhere. And we have to, overcome that. And that's the hardest change to make. I really agree. And yes, we will send people the chat and the info and the links. So I thank everybody once again. I don't know, Ben, you as a co-host, if you would have something else you'd like to say, feel free.
It has been said, folks, united, we make freedom happen. Let's unite, let's do the work. Let's make 2025 an extraordinary day extraordinary year for liberation. Thank you.